I gave that company 27 years. 2 recessions, for CEOs, countless nights I stayed at my desk while the rest of the floor went dark. I wasn't just building quarterly reports, I was building trust, reputation, systems they still rely on today. And when the promotion came up, I thought, finally. Finally, it's my turn. But they gave it to her. Samantha Klein. Sharp smile. New heels every Monday. The woman I trained. The woman I defended when no one else took her seriously. The woman who cried in my office the first month she joined, swearing she was overwhelmed and terrified of failing. I lifted her up. I shaped her voice. I let her shadow me in meetings. And in the end, she used every one of those shadows to step in front of me. When the news was announced, I didn't cry. I nodded. I smiled. And I started keeping receipts. Emails she forwarded without permission. Presentations with entire slides lifted from my drafts. Tiny inconsistencies in expense reports. Whispers in hallways that didn't stop when I walked in. For a year, I let her enjoy the view from my window. Until the view turned into a spotlight. I sent one anonymous envelope to the audit team. Then I watched the scaffolding of her stolen success collapse, one misfiled bonus form, one unverifiable invoice at a time. And when HR asked me if I had anything to add, I handed them a USB. No words. Just truth. She was fired. No exit speech. No farewell lunch. Just silence. Some people told me I should feel closure. That I should forgive. But forgiveness is not an obligation. It's a privilege. And she never earned it. I used to believe loyalty was a virtue. That if you worked hard, kept your head down, and stayed loyal to your team, you'd be rewarded. I believed in that story long after I should have stopped. Because loyalty cost me more than betrayal ever could. The months after Samantha's firing were complicated. HR tried to be diplomatic. We regret the outcome, they said, as if fraud were a scheduling error. They offered me a quiet bonus and a half-hearted apology. We should have recognized your contributions sooner. Sooner? I'd given them nearly 3 decades. I built their compliance system from scratch. I trained 3 generations of analysts. I saved them from a multi-million-dollar tax audit in 2011 with one spreadsheet I stayed up 2 nights to finish. But they only remembered me when someone else's mistakes exploded in their faces. They didn't promote me afterward. Of course they didn't. Too much bad press, they said. It would look political. So they brought in an outsider. A man with half my experience and twice the arrogance. He shook my hand at the all-hands meeting like he was meeting a secretary. I wanted to quit. Every bone in my body said walk away. But something stopped me. Pride? Maybe. Or maybe it was this quiet, burning need to stay, not for them, but for me. Because you don't spend your life building a foundation just to abandon it when someone else paints the walls the wrong color. So I stayed. I mentored younger women, quiet ones who reminded me of myself before the world taught me to question everything. I told them things I wish someone had told me. That talent doesn't protect you from politics. That kindness can be mistaken for weakness. That you're allowed to say no, even when it shakes the table. And while I poured myself into them, I rebuilt myself too. I started writing again. Late nights, early mornings, tiny pages of truth. Essays on trust, betrayal, legacy. At first, it was just for me. But then someone passed one to a friend, and another to a blog, and suddenly I was being invited to speak. Not about accounting. About survival. And every time I stepped on a stage and told my story, another piece of the bitterness left my chest. But forgiveness? That never came. Not because I couldn't. Because I refused to pretend the wound didn't matter. Some things don't need to be healed. Some things just need to be acknowledged. And sometimes, walking through the fire doesn't mean coming out clean. It just means you learned how to stop apologizing for the burn marks. There's a certain silence that follows betrayal. Not the dramatic kind with slamming doors and shouted words, but the quiet reshuffling of your place in a room. You begin to notice it in the way meetings are scheduled without you. In the emails where your name is no longer CC'd. In the lunches you aren't invited to. But what they didn't realize was that I'd already survived worse. So when the company brought in that shiny new CFO, young, male, overconfident, I didn't flinch. He walked into meetings like he invented the balance sheet. Called me Lorraine like he was trying it on for size, never Ms. Whitaker. Assumed I was someone's assistant more than once. I smiled. Took my notes. Let him underestimate me. Because I'd learned something powerful in the aftermath of Samantha: silence is a weapon, too. Not submission, strategy. So I made myself invaluable. Again. But this time I documented everything. Every system I fixed. Every crisis I resolved. I started speaking at finance forums, publishing thought pieces on ethical leadership, guest lecturing at universities. My name stopped being internal, it became public. Recognized. Respected. I got offers. Interviews. Invitations. For the first time in my career, I was being seen not as a loyal employee, but as a voice. One worth listening to. The irony? The same board that let Samantha take my job now asked me to represent the company at an international leadership summit in New York. Me. The woman they tried to bury in legacy. I accepted. I wore my mother's brooch on stage. The one she gave me when I graduated. I looked into that crowd, executives, analysts, interns, skeptics, and I told them everything. Not about names or companies. But about truth. About how leadership without integrity is just ego in a suit. About how betrayal in the workplace cuts deeper than most HR departments will ever understand. And when I stepped off that stage, people didn't shake my hand out of politeness. They thanked me like I had handed them something they'd been missing: permission to name what hurt. Back at the office, things shifted. People began stopping me in the halls, not to talk about spreadsheets, but to share their own stories. Women in particular. That happened to me, they'd whisper. I thought I was the only one. I listened. Every time. Because sometimes, the most radical thing a woman can do in a boardroom is not raise her voice, but make space for someone else's. And eventually, I realized. I didn't need a seat at their table. I was already building my own stage. There comes a moment, after all the fire and fallout, when the noise fades. No more whispers. No more damage control. Just stillness. And in that stillness, you ask yourself the question no one prepares you for. Now what? I had exposed the betrayal. Reclaimed my voice. Spoken on stages I once only watched from the sidelines. But for the first time in decades, I was no longer working to prove anything. Not to a board. Not to a boss. Not even to myself. I had won. But winning and healing? They're not the same. Winning is loud. It's headlines and handshakes and a list of accomplishments that look good in your obituary. Healing is quiet. It's closing your laptop at 5 p.m. for no reason at all. It's saying no to the next offer, even when it comes with prestige and applause. So that's what I did. I stepped away. No announcement. No grand farewell. I submitted my final reports, cleared my desk, and walked out with my shoulders back and nothing left to prove. I left the corner office exactly as I had found it, clean, silent, and colder than anyone admitted. And then, I exhaled. 4 months, I wandered. I took trains without knowing the destination. I sat in old bookstores in cities I'd never visited. I learned how to cook without a timer. I watched the sunset without checking my email. I remembered who I was before everything had to be earned. And slowly, peace returned. Not as an absence of pain, but as a new kind of power. I started mentoring, not in corporate programs, but one-on-one. Young women in finance who had stories like mine but no one to tell them they weren't crazy. I listened to interns who had been spoken over in meetings. I sat with professionals who cried in bathroom stalls and thought they were weak for doing so. I told them what no one told me. You can be powerful and gentle. You can be angry and graceful. You can be wounded and still whole. And most of all, you don't owe your forgiveness to anyone who mistook your kindness for submission. One afternoon, I ran into Samantha. I was speaking at a private ethics seminar. She wasn't a guest, she was part of the catering team. She saw me. Our eyes met. She looked down first. She didn't speak. And I didn't either. Because peace isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's the ability to stand in front of the person who once broke you, and feel absolutely nothing at all. I walked away without looking back. That was the day I understood. Power isn't just about what you can control. Sometimes, it's about what you can finally release. There was a time when my entire identity lived inside a company email address. Lorraine.Whitaker@____corp.com. I signed every document with pride. Wore that name like armor. Because back then, I thought success meant belonging to something bigger than myself. A system. A firm. A legacy. But legacies built on loyalty alone are fragile. The older I got, the more I realized, I didn't want my name to be attached to someone else's brand. I wanted to be the brand. So I started over. Not from scratch, but from experience. I launched Whitaker & Company, a private consultancy focused on ethical restructuring and female executive coaching. I didn't hire a marketing agency. I didn't rent an office in a skyline tower. I built slow, steady, quiet. The same way I had survived. Clients came not for flash, but for truth. Companies in crisis. Women on the verge of walking away. Teams fractured by ego. I wasn't there to coddle or fix everything. I was there to show them what accountability really looked like, and what healing could feel like without apology. And it worked. Soon, my voice was in boardrooms I'd never even applied to. I didn't knock on doors anymore, they called me. I chose who I wanted to work with. And when someone said, "You're exactly what we need," I could finally say, "Let me see if you're what I want." That was power. Not dominance. Not ego. Choice. And in between meetings, I wrote essays. Workshops. A book. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. In the final chapter, I told my story, not as a cautionary tale, but as a mirror. A reminder that the strongest women are not the ones who never fall. They're the ones who get back up, with memory sharp, head high, and heart still intact. I didn't forgive Samantha. I didn't need to. I forgave myself. For staying silent too long. For thinking I needed permission. For shrinking to make others comfortable. Now, when I walk into a room, I bring all of me. The woman who stayed late and made no excuses. The woman who was sabotaged, but not erased. The woman who stood still while others scrambled. The woman behind the brand. Lorraine Whitaker. Not just a name. A force.